ecosystem is shaping up in India as to probably what you see outside, and also what are the areas where there are gaps in this ecosystem. So we'll go about in the future later, but give us a good sense of the present today.
Yeah, let's just start with the history then, right? Uh, in India, the data centers has started taking a shape after the cloud transformation of the cloud movement started. So the hyperscalers and the cloud service providers, they started entering into the country in 2015, 16. Before that, many of these startups that in India came uh, on the back of the cloud services, they ended up using the infrastructure outside India. One of the large hyperscaler player earned more than $200 million revenue from India in 2015 without having the data center presence in the country. From there, when it is started, it is still has not reached to any stage where it could be the kind of capacity that the United States have. So, for example, the United States at the end of 2024, my numbers could be wrong here and there, but somewhere between 20 to 25 gigawatt of the data center capacity versus India's just 1.3 gigawatt, which is today probably 1.5 gigawatt. So, a lot definitely needs to happen to get where we should be. So, talking about the future later, but what is happening today,
Yeah.
right? Uh, Out of that 1.5 gigawatt capacity that we have today in the data center infrastructure, close to 3 to 3.5 gigawatt capacity is under development. Now, under development capacity could come live, let's say, next 2 to 3 years. And you would say that India will be 3 times the data center capacity of today in 2 to 4 years, but it still will not be enough what is required to be taken care of. And there is a lot more need to happen and lot faster it needs to happen so that the time to market is shorter and shorter possible so that we could bring 10 gigawatt in next 4 years, not uh, just the 3 to 4 gigawatt. And how things are happening for towards that, how is industry reacting to that, how is the infrastructure reacting to that, and how the whole ecosystem is building around that. So it starts with the, you could say, the capital. uh, it feels like that there is no shortage of capital right now. This is the capital intensive business, and this is the business where the returns could be made in the assured way with a very high credit worthy customers. Therefore, the credit is not such a, or the capital is not such a big issue. Second is the government support and the policy and the regulatory framework. It does look like government is very, very supportive to the data center infrastructure. It's such a huge event being organized today in this week for AI, that AI event will have make no sense if we didn't have the data center infrastructure, the layer below what will run the AI. So government is supportive. Recent times we would have seen, Ashish, you and I both have followed that how government had been consistently organizing the consultations with the industry. In fact, government has heard the hyperscalers also, and their demand has been met, it seems, in the latest union budget, and that will probably create a lot more demand. One of the big tax hurdles that they were facing, one of the big policy hurdles they were facing, it is now removed, so that does create a demand acceleration for to bring the hyperscaler support also. Infrastructure is coming up very nicely. Uh, Unlike the US, where the energy time to market for energy currently right now is 3 to 5 years, and the hyperscalers or the data center service providers there cannot wait for utility to bring that energy so long, and therefore they are doing a lot of behind the meter infrastructure, the power development. That scene doesn't exist in India. India has the surplus power capacity, and the transmission infrastructure is in such a way that it can bring power to whatever extent possible to the facility at the moment when it is required. So in a way, the ecosystem is fully in place to really catapult us to the extent where we need to be. It's just that we all together need to execute it. And there is enough number of us who are making sure that we get to that capacity level as quickly as possible.
All right. So, Sharad, we heard from you, and it's very clear and loud in this room that as far as the data center layer is concerned, we are only dealing with the problem of plenty. And really we have to, for it is for us as an industry to capture the market.
Exactly.
And I also agree with you that from a government point of view, from the policy lens, because that's something that we've been working closely with the industry, that they've really tried to address, whatever concerns that could be there in terms of making a lot of those commitments in investment actually happen. And but before I move on, and I'll come to Rushali just in a minute, is that tell me, when you talk about the ecosystem today, how would you rate the Indian data center ecosystem when you think in terms of things like resilience or things like incident response? So just a quick answer. What is your sense?
See, we can measure it in terms of the outcomes.
Hmm.
Uh,
You can give me an example to
Yeah,
explain. Yeah.
I mean, we measure it in terms of the outcomes and what is the expected outcome of an infrastructure. It should always be available. It should be resilient in the sense that redundancies should not be lost. There should be least amount of risk into the infrastructure. It should be secured physically and the software layer and network layer and all layers. It should be safe. It's the electrons per square millimeter is very high in the data center. It's not such a safe place if it's not well taken care of. And then it should be working towards the sustainability, that is the renewable energy consumption, and then also towards the RE100 or net zero goals. In all these aspects, India had been a zero availability incidents. We haven't seen any downtime of data centers in the country. We haven't seen any physical security incidents in the data center. Safety during whether the construction, deployment, or operation. We don't have any recorded safety incidents that have impacted the life. Obviously, there will be good saves and near misses at times, but not to the extent that there had been the losses. And then generally it had been resilient. In fact, our customers keep us on the toe when we lose the resiliency. So the example is that if there is a redundancy in the infrastructure and the redundancy goes down, then not just us, but our customers also get nervous about that. And that's where we are. The country is full of engineering talent who are designing and deploying and then operating these very, you could say, mission critical setups. And they are able to do it very nicely.
All right, great. So I'm going to come back to you later, and I'm going to shift track a little bit, And Rushali, you are the global director for climate operations at Google, and we are so delighted to have you here. And what I want to do is to straight away jump into your role in terms of what you do, and try and understand that and the topic is the sustainability aspect, which also Sharad alluded to. And by the way, if any of the claims which he made, if you as Google say no, 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 we think these are some of these things which are not really so true, feel free to tell us. But first on the sustainability. Given the fact that in a lot of these things, when we think about from a business lens, cost, reliability, speed, these drive the entire infra ecosystem. And in some sense, one could probably argue that some of these might be at cross purposes sometimes, or at friction sometimes when you think of our sustainability goals. For example, we also think in terms of time to deploy and so on and so forth. So how does those decisions sit within an organization, and what is the journey that you have seen? And also maybe technology comes to rescue at times, but and also help us understand in terms of geographies, because you operate at a global level, that do these decisions and these aspects materially change when you look at particular kind of geographies? Because in India, south of equator, there is a heat, there is all of those kind of issues. So help us understand, how does your role really define some of these things when you look at sustainability as a objective in itself.
Thank you. That's a lot of questions. So I'm going to try and remember as many as much as I can. Can everybody hear us? Yes. Thank you. I'm going to start with first saying thank you. This is like it's an interesting event to be at, right? Having an AI summit in India at the time when you're talking about so much of infrastructure expansion, and it's so linked to clean energy and that expansion. So it's a fascinating time, and I'm super privileged to be here. I also appreciate the fact that between the three main pillars and the seven chakras, you have all of the elements of sustainability, which is planet, or whether it's resiliency or people. And I appreciate that, because I think that's this kind of philosophy we have internally within Google, and I'm sure all the hyperscalers have, as to how do you look at growth. And there was a time where sustainability used to be more like a CSR, more like a wrapper, more like building on things. And what I think has shifted in a good way is how do you build all of these things into it versus bolting it on later on. And I'll walk you through a few examples. So my role at Google is to help Google decarbonize across all its operations and its value chain. That's sort of like, at the top of it. But what that includes is looking at every single aspect that we have in Google, whether it's your foundations, from your your materials that you get in, to your construction, to how do you operate a data center, to then how do you actually sort of generate anything on top of it, whether it's green software or the application. So how do we build sustainability or carbon or any of those metrics as we go along the process? And there are trade-offs. I don't think, if anybody tells you it's a win-win, it's a good idea. But in general in life, I think we always have trade-offs. And what I believe is more authentic is appreciating those trade-offs and then working through it as you go through. And so a good example is, I think what you said is, right now we're at an interesting point where we have the technologies, but the speed at which we need AI deployed, the speed at which we need infrastructure built, and the speed at what it takes to normally deploy some of these technologies don't always go hand in hand. And you mentioned about in the US, right? The time for interconnection, the time to get grid energy is so much longer, and you're trying to figure out new models around it. So there is a trade-off between speed, technology, efficacy, and how do you do that, and where does innovation come into play? In some other ways, there are within trade-offs, I would say there's more like design considerations. So you talked about, different geographies. Now, some are hotter than the others, some are more water risk zones than the others. And so when we look at design for data centers, we look at some of those pieces as to, like, we use an air-cooled system, it's a water-intensive region. We use a water one where we have enough access to water. So those are actually design considerations. And I can tell you, the hyperscalers have been doing this for quite a few years. So from a design perspective, I think we've have enough knowledge. The question is how fast and where you can customize it to that location. And that, I think, is the next piece that we're trying to get to, right? So the India data centers will be fantastic. We've got smaller pieces, but like the scale at which we're looking at now means we look at these design considerations slightly differently. Um, I'll address one other thing. We've sort of, in general, I feel there's a lot of discussion around energy, power, and water are the bigger constraints that come out of the data centers. For the most part, so Google has so far done 22 gigawatts of clean energy across, and that's a huge thing. We started off with like initiating and inventing PPAs before everybody was on board. And why I say that, because it's actually a good thing to have this growth, and tech companies who are generally are good at capex and have good capital foundations, and who are good at innovation and scaling at the cutting edge of energy transition, because I think that momentum is helping everyone to move forward faster. You're seeing a lot more, amongst all the hyperscalers, you're doing first of a kind projects, you're doing things which then moves the innovation faster, because you have someone taking the bet, you have someone who's investing the early pilot phases into it. And then you also have them as big off-takers. Remember, in the energy market, you need big off-takers, you need commitments to do that. And I think those are the pieces that we lean into. So from a sustainability perspective, just rounding it up, it's in your design, it's in your procurement, it's in your how you're thinking about data center siting, access to clean energy, and not what you take from the grid, but what you can actually add and bring on as you build operations.
All right. No, that's good to know, Rushali. And I think it is amazing to also hear